If there's one thing I've learned on this journey, is that hope is not a mood. It's not the percentage chance of something going well. Hope is a verb. It's a practice, a discipline, an ethos. It's something that you actually do and must do.
Our situation is admittedly bleak, Andrew. The scientific community agrees that we're on course to eclipse the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit established by the Paris Climate Accords. What this means is that there's no preventing a climate catastrophe. We must instead find a way to survive it. Your book was written with such a reckoning in mind, and rather than rehashing the science, it helps us navigate a path between the denial and doom that you, and many of us, have ricocheted between in recent years, suggesting instead frames of mind and dispositions of spirit we might bring to this predicament. Please describe what you're hoping to achieve with this book.
Yeah, as you rightly point out, the latest science makes it pretty clear that civilization, as we've known it, cannot continue. The very worst case scenario is what they call near-term human extinction. But the best case scenario is that we're able to retool our economy and our way of relating to one another to survive in a more humble balance with a natural world that we, unfortunately, have permanently damaged. That is the quote-unquote better catastrophe of the book's title. The problem here, of course, is that even this better catastrophe is a daunting prospect, and it's hard to make progress, the kind of progress we need when you're shut down. So how do we stay engaged and sane at the same time? My hope was to explore that predicament and offer approaches for folks like myself who've been looking for lifeboats. This book is full of lifeboats. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, including stories, strategies, philosophical approaches, and as well as just some basic clarifications. Is it the end of the world? No, but it is the end of the world as we have known it. As our civilization increasingly runs up against ecological limits, it will unravel and be forced to radically change. There will be a lot of suffering. It won't be pretty. It won't be fair. But what do? Do we throw up our hands? No. We do what we can. We distribute that suffering more equitably. We shape our unraveling for the better. A lot of people imagine our civilization is heading straight off a cliff, but it's a big cop-out to assume we're already doomed, right? It's more empowering, and in fact, it's more accurate to imagine the canoe of our civilization caught in a dangerous rapids. And as we hurtle downwards, there are still places where we can get a paddle in to shift course and avoid the worst outcomes. Yes, it's a daunting situation. That's a hard story to live out, but at least there's agency in this version of the story. Agency, responsibility, and in fact, possibility. There's stuff we can do, and what we do matters.
Many people are familiar with the 5 stages of grief, a framework introduced by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in the late 1960s that you believe useful as we navigate the climate crisis. You nevertheless felt the model lacked an important 6th stage, something you call gallows humor. What does it bring to this process you felt was missing?
When you strip it down, the job of a climate activist, if you think about it, is not really to save the world, but to help it get less worse more slowly. Right? And that's some dark gallows humor right there. Because basically climate activists are knocking on doors going, "Man, would you please sign this petition to only destroy half the planet?" Oh, yes, ma'am. It's very important. That's the basic MO if you think about it. It always brings me back to Oscar Wilde, his statement that's always been a touchstone for me. If you're going to tell people the truth, you'd better make them laugh, or else they'll want to kill you. I followed that advice in many of my truth-telling efforts on the activist front over the years. The truth about our climate future is one of the most terrible truths anyone has ever had to tell, which is why this book has chapter titles like, "Don't worry, we're not heading off a cliff, just down a sharp, slippery slope." Or, "We have met the enemy and he is us." No, them, but also us, but mostly them. Or, "We're all in this together." Not. Which brings out the asymmetry of impacts and the climate justice dimension of things. I think it's a kind of hope. Gallows humor is a kind of hope. It's a reframing, a cosmic defiance, a way to face even the worst of circumstances without becoming a victim of them.
As a result of this journey you've been on over the past several years, what can you share with us? How has your perspective changed? Should we bring children into such a world? Is hope warranted? Should we keep separating our paper and glass?
One of my touchstones is a Jewish wisdom teaching that, paraphrased a bit, basically goes, it's not your job to save the world, but it is your job to try to save the world. Mm-hmm. So, if we apply that lens, by that standard, yes, one needs to keep on going. I can't go on, I must go on, like as the poet said, right? Mm-hmm. And if you want to, yes, bring children into this world. After all, it's the only world we've got right now, right? For my part, I do keep separating my paper and glass, even though I don't totally trust the recycling authorities doing all the things we hope they're doing with it. But partly because, it helps me stay aligned with my own values. I think of it as a kind of ritualized prayer, a prayer for a better world. So I keep doing it, even with all the uncertainties and shortfalls of recycling. It's not the only thing to do by any means. That's the weakness there, but it is definitely something to do alongside much bigger things. Mm-hmm. So, and then you asked the big question: is hope warranted? That's just, I think, on everyone's heart and mind. And the book, in its essence, is an investigation to hope. Search for the kind of hope that will serve us in the dark times ahead.
You've been listening to a conversation with Andrew Boyd, author of the new book, I Want a Better Catastrophe: Navigating the Climate Crisis with Grief, Hope, and Gallows Humor.